My name's Liam. I'm 24 years old, and this is the story of how my dad's fiancée tried to turn my childhood home into her personal kingdom. It started on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. I had come home from my job early, grabbed some takeout, and was sitting in the living room, flipping through old photo albums. Those albums were always there, stacked neatly on the corner shelf, full of birthdays, graduations, and summer trips. For me, they weren't just pictures. They were proof that this house had always been my anchor. It was the only place that felt like mine, even when life outside was unpredictable. My mom passed away when I was a teenager, and after that, the house became quieter, almost sacred. Dad kept going, working long hours, and I tried to keep myself busy with school and part-time jobs. Over the years, it was just the two of us until he met Brenda. That was her name, Brenda, the fiancée. From the start, something about her rubbed me the wrong way. She had this air of entitlement, like she was auditioning for the role of queen of the house rather than trying to blend into the family. But Dad seemed happy, and I wanted him to have that, so I bit my tongue. Still, little things added up. She'd rearrange furniture without asking, tossing out pieces my mom had chosen. She'd complain that I didn't contribute enough when I was still finishing college and working 2 jobs to pay my tuition. She'd sigh loudly when I came in late from work, like my schedule inconvenienced her. It was the type of behavior you notice, but tell yourself not to overthink. Until one day, it escalated. That Sunday, I was sitting there flipping through pictures of me and Mom at the lake when Brenda walked in. She didn't greet me, didn't ask what I was looking at. Instead, she pointed at me, her perfectly manicured finger aimed like I was a trespasser. "From now on," she said, her voice dripping with smug authority, "you'll be paying rent if you want to stay here." I froze, the photo album heavy on my lap. Rent? In my own house. My dad's house. The house my mom's laughter once filled. I glanced at Dad, who was standing near the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked down, avoiding my eyes. Silent. That silence stung more than Brenda's words. If he had laughed it off or told her to stop, maybe I would have brushed it aside. But he just stood there as if he'd already given her permission to say it. Brenda smirked, folding her arms. "It's time you start pulling your weight," she added, as if I'd been freeloading. That was rich, considering I had paid for groceries countless times, fixed things around the house, and even covered some of Dad's bills when work got slow. I remember the way the walls around me suddenly felt smaller, closing in. This wasn't just a house. This was my home. Every corner had my childhood imprinted on it. The scuffed hallway where I used to race toy cars. The kitchen where Mom taught me how to make pancakes. The backyard where Dad once built me a treehouse. And here was this woman, who hadn't been around for any of it, declaring herself judge and jury of who deserved to live here. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. I closed the album carefully, set it aside, and looked Brenda straight in the eye. "Is that so?" I asked. Her smile widened like she'd won something. Dad still said nothing. That silence, that approval of hers, cut me deeper than I could admit. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just sat there, my mind racing. I thought about the years of sacrifices, the nights I stayed up studying by this very lamp, the mornings I left for school before sunrise. I thought about how hard I worked to prove myself, not just to the world, but to Dad, too. And yet, here I was, being treated like some intruder in my own story. I took a slow breath, and that's when I gave an answer that changed everything in that house forever. But before I tell you what I said, you need to understand just how far things had already gone behind the scenes. I leaned back that day, letting Brenda's words hang in the air like smoke. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting right then. But from that moment forward, the air in the house shifted. It wasn't just home anymore. It was a stage where Brenda kept testing the limits and my dad kept shrinking into the background. Over the next few weeks, the small jabs grew into something bigger. She started with the chores. Every time she walked past my room, she'd throw in a pointed comment. "You know, it wouldn't kill you to vacuum once in a while," or, "I noticed the trash was full this morning. Must be nice to live rent-free and still skip out on responsibilities." It wasn't about the chores themselves. I did my part, always had. It was about control, about her trying to rewrite the script, so I looked like the lazy one, the unwanted guest. What made it worse was Dad's silence. He'd be sitting in his recliner watching TV while she lobbed her little remarks at me, and he'd just let them land. He wouldn't step in, wouldn't tell her she was out of line. He'd just sip his coffee, eyes glued to the screen, as though if he pretended hard enough, the conflict would dissolve on its own. Then came the favoritism. Brenda had a son from her first marriage, Kyle, a year younger than me. He wasn't around much at first, but when he did start staying over, suddenly the rules bent for him. He could leave dirty dishes in the sink for days, and Brenda would laugh it off. He's just tired from school. If I left a single plate unwashed because I had a late shift, she'd stand in the kitchen doorway with her hands on her hips, sighing theatrically. Some people really don't know how to be part of a household. It didn't stop there. Dad had always promised me the old study would eventually be mine, a quiet space for when I wanted to work on my projects or maybe even start my own business. I'd helped him clean it out years ago, dusting shelves and sorting through boxes of my mom's books. That room held meaning for me. But one afternoon, I came home to find Kyle lugging a gaming chair inside. Brenda beamed, announcing, "We thought it'd be perfect for Kyle's setup. You don't mind, do you?" I didn't mind. I minded so much it felt like my chest was being crushed. But I said nothing in that moment because my dad was right there, nodding like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nights became the hardest. I'd hear them downstairs laughing, ordering takeout, planning renovations. I'd catch snippets. Brenda talking about repainting the living room. Kyle suggesting knocking down a wall to make more space for his stuff. And my dad, he'd chuckle along, tossing in comments about how the place could use a refresh. I'd lie awake in my room staring at the ceiling, remembering how different things used to be, how Dad and I would sit at the kitchen table eating leftovers and talking about my classes, or how he'd tell me stories about when he was young. Those moments had been replaced with Brenda's voice echoing through the halls, drowning out everything familiar. The breaking point, though, came during a family dinner. Brenda had decided to host one, inviting a few of her relatives. She set the table with new dishes she'd bought apparently. The ones Mom had chosen weren't modern enough. I was already on edge, but I sat down quietly, determined to keep the peace. Halfway through the meal, one of her cousins asked how things were working out with me still living there. Brenda smiled sweetly, glanced at me, and said, "Oh, Liam? He's adjusting. We finally got him to start paying his way around here." The table erupted in approving nods. My fork clattered against my plate. I hadn't agreed to pay rent. Not a single word had been exchanged about it since that Sunday. But here she was, parading me in front of her family like some unruly tenant she'd graciously whipped into shape. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to correct her, to say something anything that would set the record straight. Instead, he chuckled weakly and muttered, "Yeah, he's figuring it out." That was the moment something inside me cracked. It wasn't just the lie or the favoritism or the manipulation. It was the realization that Dad had chosen silence so long it had turned into compliance, that he was willing to let her rewrite my place in this house while he stood by. I didn't argue at that dinner. I didn't confront anyone. I just smiled faintly, pushed my plate back, and excused myself early. But as I climbed the stairs, their laughter carrying up after me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about Brenda anymore. It was about Dad, too. And if they thought I'd roll over quietly, they didn't know me at all. That night, I sat in my room staring at the family photo I'd left on my nightstand. Me, Dad, and Mom at the beach when I was 10. I could almost hear her voice telling me not to let anyone take away what mattered most. And in that silence, a plan started to form. The weeks after that dinner blurred together, but the tension in the house only thickened. I tried to keep to myself, focusing on work, bringing home groceries, even fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom without being asked. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Brenda's smile was always waiting for me, sharp as glass, and Dad's silence grew heavier by the day. Then came the moment that split everything in half. The betrayal, so deep it left me staring at the walls of my own room, wondering if I even knew who my father was anymore. It started on a Friday afternoon. I had just gotten off a long shift and drove home, exhausted but relieved to be done for the week. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a moving truck parked out front. My stomach tightened instantly. No one had mentioned moving anything, and the sight of strangers hauling boxes through the front door made my heart pound. I rushed inside, and there he was, Kyle, standing in the hallway with a smug grin, directing the movers. My old room, my childhood room, was wide open. I saw boxes labeled Kyle's clothes, gaming setup, and desk. The posters I had grown up with, the shelves my mom had once dusted, had been stripped bare. My things-me bed, my dresser, my boxes of memories were stacked messily in the hall like garbage waiting to be hauled away. I froze, gripping the door frame, my voice barely steady. What is this? Brenda appeared at the top of the stairs, arms folded, lips curled in that same victorious smirk I'd seen too many times. "Oh good. You're here," she said lightly, as though we were discussing dinner plans. "We decided it was time Kyle had a proper room. You'll be moving into the basement." The basement. The damp, unfinished space with concrete floors and one small window that barely let in light. It wasn't a bedroom. It was storage, cold, unwelcoming, and full of boxes from years past. I stared at her, my voice trembling now. "This is my room. I grew up in here." "Everything changes, Liam." She cut me off, her tone sharp. "You're an adult. It's time you learned that nothing in life is permanent. Kyle's still in school. He needs the space. And frankly, it's only fair. You're lucky we're letting you stay at all." I turned to Dad, desperate for him to say something, anything. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't even open his mouth. He just let it happen, like he had let everything else happen. That silence felt like a knife. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand he stand up for me. But instead, I felt my chest hollow out. Every memory tied to this house, every birthday morning, every late-night talk with my mom in this very room was being packed into boxes and shoved aside for Kyle's convenience. The movers brushed past me, carrying Kyle's new desk into the room. He shot me a grin as he unboxed his computer, already claiming the space as his own. "Thanks for the upgrade, man," he said casually, like I had agreed to this, like I had somehow given him permission to erase me from my own history. That night, I sat in the basement, surrounded by the faint smell of dust and mildew, staring at the pile of my belongings. My bed frame leaned crooked against the wall, my dresser wedged between old boxes of Christmas decorations. There was no space for me here, not really. And yet, Brenda had made it perfectly clear, this was all I was allowed. I lay awake on the thin mattress, listening to the laughter upstairs, Kyle and Brenda watching a movie, Dad's low chuckle blending with theirs. That sound, once comforting, now felt cruel. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just losing my room. I was losing my father. And in that hollow space, something hardened in me. If they wanted me to be invisible, they had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed. The first week in the basement was the worst. It wasn't just the cold air that seeped into my bones or the faint smell of damp cement. It was the crushing weight of realizing that my own father had allowed it. I would lie awake on that thin mattress, staring at the exposed pipes running across the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of life upstairs that no longer felt like mine. Every laugh, every clink of dishes, every footstep overhead reminded me that I had been pushed down literally and figuratively. The mornings became a quiet torture. I'd come upstairs to make coffee and find Kyle lounging in my old room, door wide open, music blasting, the smell of fast food wrappers drifting into the hallway. He'd call out casually, "Morning, basement dweller," like it was a joke we shared. Brenda, always nearby, would chuckle and shake her head like Kyle's remarks were harmless. Dad would sip his coffee silently, eyes glued to the newspaper. I never once heard him tell Kyle to stop. At work, I found myself distracted. My coworkers would ask if I was okay, and I'd brush it off with a smile. But inside, I carried that heaviness, the kind that gnaws at you until even small tasks feel monumental. I began staying late at the office, volunteering for extra shifts, not because I needed the money, but because it delayed the inevitable walk back into that house. One evening, after another long shift, I sat in my car outside the house, engine running, lights off. I watched the glow of the television flickering through the living room curtains and heard faint bursts of laughter drift out when someone opened the door. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the place I had once called home, feeling like an outsider watching a family that no longer included me. When I finally went inside, Brenda was in the kitchen with her sister, sipping wine and talking about the renovations she wanted to make. "This wall could come down," she said, gesturing to the dining area. "It'll be perfect once Kyle officially moves in full time. We'll have so much more space." Her words hit me like a punch. Once Kyle officially moves in full time. It wasn't just a temporary arrangement. She was laying claim to the house piece by piece, as if my mom's memory, my childhood, even my dad's ownership didn't exist. That night in the basement, surrounded by stacked boxes, I opened one marked Mom's Things. Inside were photo albums, her old scarf, a few letters she had written to Dad, and a framed picture of the three of us at the lake when I was 7. I held that photo in my hands until my vision blurred. I could almost hear her voice reminding me that this house was more than just walls. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, but it wasn't anymore. Something shifted in me then. The grief turned into resolve. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for Dad to step up. He had made his choice, silence. If I wanted to protect what was left of my dignity, maybe even reclaim what this house meant to me, I'd have to do it myself. I didn't storm upstairs or confront anyone that night. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started digging through old documents. Mortgage papers, tax records, the deed. I wanted to know exactly what tied this house together, who truly had rights to it, and where Brenda's supposed authority began and ended. As I read through those papers, another thought crept in. Maybe I didn't need to fight them directly. Not yet. Maybe the best revenge would come quietly, methodically, one piece at a time. So, while upstairs they laughed, planned, and celebrated their little victories, I sat in the cold basement, silently piecing together a plan. It was the lowest I had ever felt. But in that low point, something dangerous was born. Patience. Something happened after those long nights in the basement. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the sting of betrayal finally hardening into something useful. But I started to see things differently. The house that once felt like everything, the core of my identity, began to shrink in importance. Brenda wanted me small, invisible, boxed into a damp corner of my own life. And for a while, she succeeded. But the longer I stayed quiet, the more I realized silence didn't mean weakness. Silence meant preparation. I started spending less and less time at home. Not just because I couldn't stand the smug look on Kyle's face when I passed him in the hallway, or the way Brenda sighed dramatically when I opened the fridge, but because I had somewhere better to be. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into every shift, stayed late, and volunteered for weekend projects. My manager noticed. Within 2 months, I was offered a promotion, a salary position with real benefits, the kind of step forward I'd been chasing since college. The day I signed the paperwork, I sat in my car afterward and just let out this long, shaking breath. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't trapped. My bank account reflected the change, too. With each paycheck, I built a small cushion sense of security, power even. I didn't flaunt it at home. I still carried myself quietly, still endured Brenda's digs and Kyle's jokes. But inside, I was changing. Every cruel remark she threw at me only strengthened my resolve. Every smirk Kyle tossed my way made me more determined. And every silence from Dad reminded me that if he wouldn't stand up for me, I'd stand up for myself. I started reconnecting with people I'd let drift away. Old college friends, coworkers who'd invited me out before and I'd always declined. I said yes, more off-tinto dinners, to weekend trips, even to networking events that once made me nervous. Slowly, I built a circle of people who saw me for who I was, not the version Brenda painted in this house. One friend in particular, Chris, worked in real estate. Over beers one night, I told him about my situation not in dramatic detail, just enough to explain why I was so driven to get out. He leaned back, nodding, and said, "You know, with the way you're working now, you could be in a place of your own within the year, maybe sooner." That thought lodged itself in my mind like a spark. A place of my own. Not a basement, not a corner I was allowed to occupy, but something I chose, something I built. Back at home, I played the part Brenda expected. I kept my head down, nodded when she boasted to her relatives about how Liam's finally learning responsibility, and pretended not to notice when Kyle called me tenant under his breath. But while they thought they were breaking me down, I was building myself up. I upgraded my wardrobe bit by bit. Nothing flashy, just sharper. A well-fitted suit for work, better shoes. Brenda noticed, of course. One morning, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Trying to impress someone?" I just smiled faintly and shrugged. The truth was, I was impressing myself. For the first time since my mom passed, I felt like I was stepping into a version of me she'd be proud of. Then came the small victories that no one in the house even noticed. I paid off my old student loan faster than expected. I got approved for a credit line that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, and I started saving with intention, not just for escape, but for leverage. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized leaving wasn't the only option. Brenda wanted me gone because my presence threatened her claim on the house, on Dad, on the life she was trying to script. But what if, instead of disappearing quietly, I positioned myself where her power couldn't touch me? That idea stayed with me quietly, like a shadow. One evening, after another long day, I came home to find Brenda and Kyle in the living room with Dad, flipping through catalogs for new furniture. Brenda held up a swatch of fabric, chirping about how they'd redo the living room once the paperwork goes through. I paused in the doorway. Paperwork? I asked. She smiled sweetly, too sweetly. Oh, nothing you need to worry about. Just making things official. Dad's eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. And just like that, I knew whatever she was planning, it wasn't just about paint colors. I excused myself, calm on the outside, but inside, every nerve was buzzing. My rise wasn't just about money or confidence anymore. It was about timing, about being ready when the mask finally slipped and her true intentions came to light. Because something told me that moment was coming faster than I thought. I couldn't get the word paperwork out of my head. Brenda had said it so casually, like it was nothing. But the way Dad's eyes darted away told me everything. It wasn't nothing. That night, after everyone went to bed, I crept upstairs. The house was quiet, the kind of silence where every floorboard creak sounds like thunder. I moved carefully, slipping into the stud-of-me mom's old room, the one Brenda had already started turning into her personal office. Papers were spread across the desk, manila folders stacked neatly, and on top of them lay a packet stamped with the logo of a law firm. I scanned the first page, and my stomach dropped. It was a draft of a cohabitation agreement. Buried in the legal jargon was the line that made my pulse race. In the event of marriage, joint ownership of the property located at our address. My chest tightened. She wasn't just moving in. She was maneuvering her way into permanent control of the house. My mother's house, the home Dad and I had built our lives in. And Dad was going along with it. I closed the folder carefully and slipped back into the basement, my heart pounding. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling pipes, feeling both furious and oddly clear-headed. Brenda thought she was being clever, but what she didn't know was that I'd been quietly preparing. The next morning, I made a call to my friend Chris, the one in real estate. Over coffee, I laid everything out, how Brenda was trying to secure ownership, how Dad's silence was essentially handing her the keys. Chris listened carefully, then leaned forward. Do you know whose name is on the deed right now? Yes, I said firmly. I checked. It's only Dad's. Good, he replied. Then listen carefully, because this is where you stop playing defense. Over the next hour, Chris explained my options. If Dad went through with the marriage and signed that agreement, Brenda would have a legal claim to the house. But until then, there were ways to protect it, ways Dad might not even realize existed. And more importantly, there were steps I could take to put myself in a position of power, whether Dad wanted to acknowledge it or not. That conversation lit a fire in me. I started spending my evenings not in the basement sulking, but at the library and online, reading everything I could about property law, inheritance, and real estate leverage. I learned about trusts, about transfer on death deeds, about the power of timing when it came to legal documents. At the same time, my work life kept rising. The promotion had already stabilized me, but now I had something more, a growing reputation. I was being invited to industry events, shaking hands with people who actually saw value in me. And the more I built outside that house, the less Brenda's smug remarks mattered. Still, I played my role carefully at home. I didn't confront her. I didn't let on that I knew about the paperwork. I let her keep thinking she was winning. If she thought I was still that quiet, cornered kid in the basement, she wouldn't see me coming. The real turning point came 2 weeks later when I received an invitation from my manager to attend a leadership seminar in another city. It wasn't just any seminar. It was a high-level event where I'd be rubbing shoulders with executives, investors, and business owners. My manager even hinted that if I impressed the right people, there could be a fast track to a senior role. When I packed my bag that Friday, Brenda stood at the door, arms folded, smirking. Off on a little work trip? Don't stay away too long. We've got big changes coming around here. I smiled faintly, holding her gaze. Oh, I know, I said. And I meant it, because every step I was taking, every document I read, every contact I made wasn't just preparing me to leave. It was preparing me to return with leverage she couldn't touch. That weekend at the seminar was eye-opening. I met people who had built empires from nothing, who had turned setbacks into fortunes. I soaked in every lesson, every story. And by the time I got back, I wasn't the same person who had left. I was sharper, hungrier, and most importantly, I had connections. Connections that would matter very, very soon. Because when I walked through the front door Sunday night, suitcase in hand, I noticed something new pinned to the fridge, an official-looking envelope with the law firm's logo on it. And I knew the clock had started ticking. The envelope on the fridge didn't disappear, it multiplied. Within a week, more letters from the law firm started showing up, each neatly stacked in Brenda's little office corner of the kitchen. She had stopped being subtle. She would even leave them half open, like she wanted me to notice. Every time she caught me glancing at one, she'd flash that sly smile, the kind that said, "I've already won." But she didn't know how much I'd been preparing. By this point, I wasn't just surviving in that basement. I had turned it into my war room. "The key," he said, "is precision. Don't confront her head on. Let her think she's got it locked down. Then, when the timing is perfect, pull the rug out from under her." And that's exactly what I did. It started small. I began asking Dad subtle questions when Brenda wasn't around, not confrontational, just gentle reminders. "Hey, Dad, do you remember when you and Mom bought this place? What year was it again? Or, do you still have that copy of the original mortgage? I'd love to see how much things have changed since then." Each time, he'd soften a little, reminiscing. And for a flicker of a moment, I saw the man who used to tell me stories at the kitchen table. But when Brenda was in the room, I went silent. I let her think I was shrinking further, let her keep underestimating me. Behind the scenes, though, I was moving quickly. With Chris's help, I arranged a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in estate planning. I laid out everything: how my mom had originally been a co-owner, how Brenda was angling for joint ownership through marriage, how Dad's silence was enabling it all. The lawyer listened carefully, then nodded. "You have more leverage than you think," she said, "especially if your father hasn't signed anything yet." That was the key. Nothing had been signed. And I knew Brenda's type well enough. She was probably counting on Dad's passivity, his unwillingness to rock the boat, to eventually get what she wanted. But passive men still sign papers when handed to them at the right time. I couldn't afford to let it reach that point. So, I devised a plan. Step 1 was building undeniable proof of my financial independence. I pulled records of my steady income, my promotion, my clean repayment of debts. I even opened a modest investment account to show I wasn't just stable, I was growing. Step 2 was gathering the history of the house, the timeline of ownership and evidence of my contributions to maintaining it over the years. Step 3 was the trickiest, setting the stage for Dad to make a choice without Brenda hovering over his shoulder. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, Brenda announced she was taking Kyle on a weekend trip to visit colleges. She boasted about how exciting it was to look at dorms and campuses, adding a pointed, "Of course, Kyle deserves a real start." I just nodded, hiding the satisfaction curling in my chest. That weekend, while the house was quiet, I sat down with Dad at the kitchen table, the same table where he and Mom once sat together. I laid out everything, calmly, factually. I showed him the draft agreement, the highlighted clause about joint ownership, the risks he hadn't considered. I didn't accuse him. I didn't shout. I just spoke the truth. "Dad," I said quietly, sliding the papers toward him, "if you sign this, the house won't just be yours anymore. It won't be ours. It'll be hers. And once that happens, nothing stops her from pushing me out completely, or worse, selling it out from under us." He looked pale, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the pages. For the first time, I saw a real doubt flicker across his face. "I didn't realize," he whispered. I leaned in. "You don't have to fight her. You just have to protect what's already yours. What Mom left us." The silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. Then, slowly he nodded. "What do we do?" That was the opening I had been waiting for. With the lawyer's help, we drafted a living trust that secured the house in Dad's name and designated me as the beneficiary. It wasn't about cutting him out. It was about shielding the house from anyone else's hands. The lawyer walked him through every step, making sure he understood, making sure it was his decision. And when he finally signed the papers, I felt a weight lift off my chest I hadn't realized I was carrying. The house was safe. When Brenda and Kyle returned that Sunday, she was all smiles, chattering about their trip. She didn't notice anything different. She didn't see the new trust paperwork locked safely away or the quiet confidence in my posture as I carried my things upstairs, not into the basement, but into the spare room Dad insisted I take back. She still thought she had me cornered. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because the real reveal, the part that would shatter her smug confidence, was still to come. Brenda never hid her confidence. She strutted around the house in those weeks, certain her plan was nearly finished. She dropped comments about our future renovations, and every time the mail came, she tore open the envelopes with the law firm's crest, humming as if victory were already signed and sealed. Kyle, emboldened by her, acted even worse, leaving trash in the living room, blasting music at midnight, calling me basement boy, even though I hadn't slept downstairs since Dad gave me the spare room back. But I stayed calm. I let them believe the stage was set, that I was still the background character in their story. The moment came one rainy Thursday evening. Brenda called a family meeting in the living room. She had the draft cohabitation agreement spread across the coffee table, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and Kyle smirking from the armchair like this was entertainment. Dad sat stiffly in his recliner, eyes darting nervously toward me. Brenda tapped the papers. "So," she began, her tone syrupy but firm, "I think it's time we make this official. Once your father and I are married, it only makes sense we share the property. It's the grown-up, responsible thing to do." She glanced at me, lips curling. "And it ensures that certain arrangements remain fair for everyone." Kyle snorted. Translation: "You finally get your eviction notice, bro?" I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, folded my hands on the table, and said evenly, "That won't be happening." Brenda blinked as though I'd spoken in another language. "Excuse me." I looked at Dad, gave him a small nod, and then turned back to her. "The house isn't part of any agreement you make. It's already protected. It's in a trust now in Dad's name, with me as the beneficiary. Legally, this place isn't yours to touch. Not now. Not ever." The room went still. Kyle's smirk vanished, his eyes darting to his mom. Brenda's face drained of color, then flushed a furious red. What did you do?" she whipped toward Dad. "You let him manipulate you into this? After everything I've done for this family." Dad's voice, quiet but firm for the first time in months, cut through her outrage. "Enough, Brenda. This house was Eleanor's and mine. It's Liam's home, and it always will be." For a moment, no one breathed. The rain outside tapped against the windows, filling the silence Brenda's voice once dominated. She sputtered, shaking her head, flipping through the papers as though she could undo them by sheer will. "This isn't fair. This isn't how it's supposed to go." Kyle muttered something under his breath, but when I met his eyes steady and unflinching, looked away. Brenda shoved the papers aside, her composure crumbling. "If this is how it's going to be," she snapped, grabbing her purse, "then maybe you don't deserve me." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. Kyle, pale and fuming, followed reluctantly, mumbling about staying at a friend's place. And then it was just me and Dad. He looked at me across the table, his shoulders heavy, his face lined with something that wasn't just guilt. It was grief, for what he'd let happen, for how long he'd stayed silent. "I should have protected you sooner," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, the photo of Mom from my nightstand flashing in my mind. "You did, Dad," I said gently. "Maybe not the way I wanted, but you stood up when it mattered most." For the first time in years, we sat together in that house and talked. Really talked. About Mom. About the years we'd both spent drifting in silence. About rebuilding what Brenda had nearly destroyed. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It felt like home. And as I walked upstairs that night, past Kyle's abandoned gaming chair in my old room, past the walls that had watched me grow up, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Brenda's scheme had crumbled. Kyle's smirks had vanished. My father had finally chosen me. The house was safe. Our home was ours again. And I knew my mother would have been proud.